All right, we are on the hour. Hello, good morning and good afternoon, and even good evening to everyone. Thank for joining us today. It's a huge pleasure. Yeah, we give everyone a couple of seconds and then we kick it off today on our webinar, Leading with IP, How Innovation Metrics Shape Market Perception. So thanks for joining us for today's session. But before we start, let me share some housekeeping notes. This webinar is recorded and you will receive a link to access it through a follow-up email. And if you have any question during the presentation, there is down below in this Zoom a question section. And we will collect all the questions and most likely will answer them at the end. Also, if you have any audio or visual problems, please let us know and we will do our best to resolve them. And at the end, you also will receive a survey following our presentation today. So please fill that out and give Michael and myself some feedback if you liked what we showed today and if we should continue with such themes. And yeah, this said, I'm really thrilled to host this conversation together with Michael from the Boston Consulting Group. And watching the stock market movements lately, I think this topic couldn't be more timely. And we see across all industry, investors' scrutiny in intensifying. And whenever uncertainty is high, you need to tell the full story. And that's on both, right? That's on tangible, but also on intangible assets. And in fact, for many companies, over 80% of this value sits in intangible assets. And that's for some part IP. So in today's webinar, we'll unpack this and you will hear from us how IP can elevate to the boardroom, how investors' perception can be shaped, and those how you can own the narrative. We structured the webinar into three parts. We will speak about the why now. We will speak about some use cases and why you should engage in that. And we will follow up with some best practices. But before going there, let's do some proper introduction. And so again, it's my pleasure, Michael, to have you here on the call. So please go ahead first for a quick introduction.
Well, thank you, Sylvan, for introducing me, and thank you everyone for joining. I also very excited to talk on this topic and kind of think it through, and I sort of agree that it could not be more timely. So my name is Michael Wallen. I'm an associate director here at Boston Consulting Group in our corporate finance and strategy practice. I've worked with over 150 companies, helping them through strategic problems, and most often I work in kind of sciencey-based industries, thinking about growth opportunities and emerging technologies. And to do that, I use a data-driven approach that builds on a lot of different innovation data sets, patents being one of the sort of bedrock tools in my toolkit. Prior to that, I was an academic, so I have a PhD from MIT and I published in a number of academic journals there. And with that, Sylvan, I'll let you introduce yourself and we can go from there.
Yeah, so real pleasure to have you here. You're well equipped. And for those careful listeners, we both had already last year a great webinar on storytelling. So it's a pleasure for me that you join again this year. And for those who don't know me yet, my name is Sylvan. I led the customer success team in EMEA for our organization, LexisNexis Intellectual Property. And my teams work with companies to turn all sorts of questions, but most likely we help customers to turn patent analytics to strategic business impact and being able to communicate then this to mostly internal, but more and more also to external stakeholders. I also hold a PhD in technology and innovation management from the University of Bonn, where my research was mainly focused on uncertainty in technology developments and essentially like how companies can make smarter bets on the future. And before joining LexisNexis, I also worked for some years in consulting industry, working with clients in banking and insurance companies on transformation strategies. even earlier, I had a startup called Ecumania. It was actually my first step into the IP world about 15 years ago, where we set up the first very early natural language processing models to uncover the structure of patent text. And although that hasn't been that successful, the entrepreneurial experience continues, I would say, and could help me to connect now to data and technology and outcomes today. And maybe on a personal note, I still live in Bonn. So we have wonderful weather, autumn sunshine here in Bonn, Germany. I have two little girls, one and 4 years old. Yeah,
I'm going to
maybe
say,
on the now. I mean, we set the scene already a bit, but why now? Why now? And for me, this topic really matters because it connects directly to what I said earlier. We see across all industries, investors scrutiny in intensifying, right? And whenever uncertainty is then high, companies need to tell the full story, and they need to tell on the 80% of enterprise value that sits in intangible assets. And these includes things like patents, R&D, software, and data. And we'll come later to why actually talking about patents might be a better indicator here to align that with intangible assets. And yet our systems haven't really caught up. So there's a study I can highly recommend to look at. It's published by the WIPO in 2024, which shows that the intangible assets reached now about $7.6 trillion globally and growing almost 4 times faster than tangible investments since 2008. And despite driving most of today's innovation and growth, they are still undermeasured and underreported, right? I mean, we are talking later about great tips and insights we see. But honestly, and if you ask yourself, how well are we reporting internally to our stakeholders on our our IP data, you might come to the same conclusion. So, and that's where the disconnect comes in, right? And the market struggles to see the real value and that innovation creates. And there's actually a recent study by the CFA Institute that highlights this gap. And they surveyed a bunch of investors, and 70% of investors believe that unrecognized intangibles are the main reason for the huge difference between book value and market value. And over 80% better or wish for better, want better disclosures on that. So there are a lot of great numbers in that report to look it up for. The sources are down in those slides and might help you also to make the case internally on why to talk on the intangible investments. So if investors are asking for more clarity, what kinds of intangible does a company have, right? And how much are they worth and what cash flows are expected from them? That's where hopefully most of you will come into play and be the ones in the organizations that can either lead those discussions themselves, but or also support them. And so the takeaway is simple, right? Like the financial statements need to involve, and adding IP analytics into reporting helps to bridge the gap and making the invisible more visible and helping investors to see your potential of that companies and to add to a really good company story that then can be sold to the stakeholders. But I mean, that's just my view. Michael, what's your view? Why are you here again?
you know what, I'm here for I've seen the same thing, and I think you're talking about kind of the macro level view of intangible assets over time. And I see a very similar thing with my clients on an even day-to-day basis. And maybe just to give one example here, I was working recently with a relatively small company that made lasers, and they made lasers as an input to some other technologies, which will keep sanitized here, but they, for a variety of reasons, knew that they were going to have to sell themselves to a larger company. And obviously, it's never the ideal outcome, but they had sort of resigned themselves to it, and it made strategic sense in this particular case. But they wanted to get obviously the best valuation that they could. And the key point is that the value wasn't in the hard assets like the physical equipment that they used to make these lasers. It was in the IP, the know-how to use these lasers and the technology trajectory of the company itself. And so the question was, how can they leverage that to achieve the best valuation possible? And that started a several-week project for us where we looked at their technology, their IP, and their intangible value. And we told a story that they could then tell to investors around what the technology they were building is, why they were the best at it, why that technology would be important in the future, and why no one really rivaled them in that. And we were able to quantify that using a variety of metrics. And that was a message that our counterparts took to their board, and the board then took to our investors. And without talking about too much of the valuation details, they were able to see a dramatic increase in the valuation they were looking at, before that analysis and after. And I think the key there, as you're talking about, is that they did not want to be being valued solely on their capital assets would have been a mistake, and it would have completely lowballed them. And it's only when they were able to kind of bring that kind of data, but also that story to investors, that they were able to kind of be able to get the valuations that, one, were the best for the company, but two, match their true worth and recognize what they were truly contributing. And I think, maybe to your point about why now, I think that so many companies, maybe this is a little bit of a pure example, but many companies find themselves in that space. And as intangible assets continue to rise in importance, it's very rare that you meet a company that isn't can't relate to that at all, right? It's like, no, we have nothing intangible. Everything we have, you can see on the shop floor, as it were. So, if you think about it though, intangible assets can mean a lot of things. And the question investors will often have, and the board will definitely have, is how do we quantify this? And what we find is that patents are an amazingly good way to do this for a variety of reasons. One is that they provide a very discrete measure of technological progress. So when they're filed, you have a filing date, you have a specific technology. You can even show people little pictures of what exactly the thing is that you did that, just getting to point two, experts approved and saw as really important and as something novel. And having that kind of very quantifiable step in the generation of knowledge and in innovation, and having the approval of an expert review really adds a lot of credibility and allows you to quantify and measure the innovation that you have. And I think the great thing about, so as a measure of a discrete innovation, patents are great, but then of course what really makes them amazing is the citation patterns. And obviously people here are I'm sort of familiar with patents, but the way I typically explain this is that when you file a patent, of course, you have to go through the patenting process and cite all of the previous innovations that came before you. And if you don't, regulators, of course, will add that. Appreciate the very high level, but the great way to think about this is that you have a chain of innovation, right? And we can tell not only what came before you, but what came after you. And that allows us to quantify a lot of things around quality, and then importantly, to measure the ecosystem. And I find this, especially with my smaller clients, being able to measure that ecosystem is hugely important, right? Because if you're a small company, people don't know what you do, where do you sit in the world? And if you can say, well, here are these companies that are great, that are building on, and look, they build on my patent, they use my idea, that's huge, right? And everybody can then appreciate that. And you have a very quantifiable, very tangible link to that. So maybe I'll go to the next slide here. So you knew that there was going to be that we were going to talk about PatentSite and how amazing it is, and here it is. But I think that there are a number of things I really like about some of the off-the-shelf measures, right, that they use. And I'll say I sort of began in this field from an academic perspective, where I would have to myself calculate a lot of citation measures and dispersion and variance in citations and trending rates, and looking at the second derivative of citation patterns and things. And what I love about using PatentSite, and I say this honestly, is that you can save yourself a lot of effort by just using some of the great measures that they have. And I'm not going to go through the whole website and tell you, but when I think about how to communicate, intangible value, but specifically around patents, there are three kind of metrics or features that really stand out to me. The first one that I use really often that I think we'll get to I think you'll see these kind of pop up later on in the presentation is around technology relevance. And I'll explain these in my own words. I suspect Sylvan has like a more precise and probably more, like they say these are a little bit hand wavy, but I typically explain that technology relevance is a measure of quality, and it's a measure of scientific quality or technological quality. It's not a legal measure, but it's a way of thinking about how many entities are building on your work. And you calculate it by looking at all the forward citations relative to patents in a similar technology in a similar year. And what I love about this is that the average is 1, so it's very easy to tell my clients if your patent has a technology relevance or your portfolio has a technology relevance of 1, your average. If it's 2, you're approximately twice as good as the average. And then sometimes you're able to find ones that are like amazing outliers, right? And so that ability to translate these across time and place and to kind of provide like a sense of scale or quantification is huge. Market coverage works much the same way. If we think about a patent family and what does the area cover, market coverage, for those who don't know, it measures the area that the patent family covers in economic, not geographic terms. So it's the size of the economy, not the number of miles in the land, for example, with the US set to 1. So if I see market coverage of 2, I know that it covers the US and approximately 1 US sized economy or group of economies outside of that. And that's, again, just really easy and intuitive for people that they can understand, okay, here's where we are and here's what we're talking about. And my patents are under, they cover this geographic area and my competitors do that. Lastly is really more of a feature than a metric, the subsequent art. And I talked a little about this a moment ago with seeing who's building on patents. I used to have to do a lot of work to find subsequent citations and figure out who the owners are. There's a lot of Python involved in that. And I love being able to click on the website and see, here are the list of some, here are those that cite the most. And I think being able to quickly identifying who's on a given patent and seeing kind of the circles that companies run, and especially when either they're a new company or they're in a new line of business, and it immediately gives credibility, right? If you can say, we're working in, the machine learning space, and we have a couple of machine learning patents, and look, Google has cited us, or something like that. And it's amazing how often you have these small companies, but it's good work, and people in the know of it, right? It's just a question of translating it outside of that. And if you can kind of show that and show that these companies that have been around forever, that are sort of household names, are building on it, or even just that the other innovators in the field are working with it, I think that's huge. And it's really helpful to think there's all sorts of strategic questions there, but then of course, a lot of valuation questions as well as you think about your place in the ecosystem. So I'll say, we'll talk a little bit about telling a story. And I think I view these as some of my core building blocks as I think about telling a story to the board and then to investors.
Yeah, I couldn't add much, I have to say, and also to have that on record. You came up with the idea to speak about patent site metrics. It wasn't me, but I'm glad you did, and love to see how you are actually, using them also in the consulting work day to day. And yeah, cool to get that. Before jumping on the best practices, let's speak a bit about the how and when. And there are multiple opportunities across the corporate cycle, and these can be from annual reports. They remain the flagship and each reach the broadest investor audience and link directly to the financial performance on the governance side. But they are also increasingly where they're also seeing companies include IP narratives in sustainability or ESG reports that are connecting to the annual reports, but are seen rather as an additional report that comes out every year. And that these are connecting also more to the long-term themes like decarbonization or the digital transformation. There are thematic reports, and investor or capital market days are another strong vehicle where you can be present. And these moments allow companies to go deeper and explain their technology leadership, their patent quality, their competitive advantage in a focused way. We have quarterly results, while brief are idle for highlighting tangible outcomes of innovation, so product launches, licensing revenues, or R&D efficiency improvements. The key message here is that IP communications shouldn't live in isolation, right? It's something that should live in either all things, and it needs to be woven naturally into your broader narrative about value creation. And by integrating the IP metrics, maybe some even of those Michael mentioned earlier, it helps you to signal to the market that innovation is not just a cost center, it's actually measurable and it's managed and it's value generating assets. And that counts for a lot of business cycles too, right? Like we shouldn't only think about the business models where licensing is the most crucial part of the business model. Being innovative shows the future of your company, right? And that's what stakeholders at the stock markets want to see. So that's a multi-channel approach, and it builds credibility with investors and ensures that you stay on a thoughtful path throughout the next years. The competition, and let's be honest, is tough. And if you look on an annual report, there is a lot of other departments that also would like to have at least a big foot in the door. And it's at most large listed companies, it's something between 8 and 12 departments that are contributing to the annual report or those company-wide reports. And that's not from a single study. We observed multiple of those in the past years. And often these are all managed by the investor relations team, and they're coordinating all the efforts across finance, strategy, legal, compliance, risk, HR, operations, R&D, ESG, or the marketing department, communications. So there are already a lot of others involved here. And I believe there are a lot of entrants also for IP teams to either go through the strategy team, through the legal team. Some might also go through the risk team, right? Like because in the end, IP is also protecting the risk. And yeah, depending on the sector, you will often see input from also then the technology side, the product side, but there is often a lot of noise, and IP might be not in the center here. And that's the issue. That's something we want to address not only in this webinar here, but also, yeah, get more into people's mind on how we can improve on that. So when IP isn't represented, the company story about tangible and intangible assets is incomplete, right? Like we're missing out the intangible part. And each other department translates its work into business outcomes. So revenue growth, you speak about your risk reduction, you can speak about your ESG impact, but IP often stops. And the internal analysis or legal reporting, although coming back to what Micah said earlier, patents make the invisible visible is short here. So what to do now? And I mean, that's maybe personal, but I'm a big fan of driving this change by myself. And I believe that to gain visibility, IP leaders have to make their contribution to align with those departments and speak the same strategic language. And it's not about counting the patents, it's about speaking the value that it adds on the assets it has right now, but also on how they are protected in the future and how they protect future revenues and how they secure the competitive advantage and how they enable a sustainable target the company is pursuing. So there's a lot of ideas on where to get the foot in the door and where to speak upon. But I strongly believe in the end it's about individuals pushing on that matter and coming up with good examples. And what good examples are, we will share later. I mean, the efforts are worth. That's what I wanted to also say on that slide. First, from a Yeah, because when the the beneficials are real, right? Like for your IP leaders personally and for the organizations as a whole. And for your IP teams, you become more visible. It means recognition. It's a chance to show how your expertise can drive business value, right? Like that it's not sits in legal compliance, so to say, right? Like that you are experts that can also add to drive that business value. And promise there are really cool research, or not research, but there are cool examples where IP and business is sitting together and defining the product roadmap for the next 30 years, to have 10 years. So to not only have a strong business and product strategy, but that this is fully aligned with also a very strong IP strategy. And for the company, the payoff is even broader, right? Integrating IP into investor communications strengthens the alignments across the departments, right? Suddenly R&D, sustainability, finance, and investor relations are looking at the same innovation story through the same lens. It underpins also the efforts, right? What you do at the moment can be then already tracked in the patent applications as it's like a value and for the future. And that clarity drives better decisions and making and helps investors to understand how the company's innovation pipeline supports these long-term value creation. And that sends a powerful external signal. So it boosts US IP managers, but also enhances the company, and it's all worth it. Coming to the best practices, Michael, maybe you start first with what one should probably try to avoid.
No, that sounds good. I think the kind of like the failure mode here is like we filed XX patents last year because nobody knows exactly what that means, or like, is this good or is this bad? How do we read this, right? The focus on quantity alone misses the kind of link between IP and value, right? And we'll kind of talk about it a little bit here. It's in order to kind of understand the value of the IP, you need to think about like the strategy and what you're going for. So taking the laser company as an example from a moment ago, right? The value there wasn't in the sort of licensing ability of the technology. It was in what it said about the company's like technological know-how and like strategic position. And telling that story is really what gives the IP and the intangible assets the value that you want, or that the board and the investors want. And so kind of the way to get around this, or way to avoid this, is really to make sure that the IP is closely connected to strategic priorities. So rather than saying things like, we filed 100 patents last year, you want to say, that we have over 100 patents on this topic that show us to be not only the market leader, but also give us a long runway for technological growth and adoption. Similarly, like if you just talk about quantity, nobody really knows if those are good patents or not. That's where I really like some of the subsequent art, and then also I think telling the story about what your product is and where it's going to highlight how these patent assets are tied to key technologies or commercial advantages. And they're a great way of like quantifying or showing the difference between what your company is doing and what else is being done on the market. And then I think in terms of like supplying the context, right? The goal is to anchor the strategy. And we'll talk about this in a minute too, but you don't want the kind of IP department or IP creation to be sort of a siloed island in the organization that like, manages like these legal things that have no sort of bearing on anything else. The goal is to really link IP to the R&D goals, to the strategy goals, to the long-term growth and product goals of the company. And in doing that, they become a really valuable tool, and that's what gives them, I think, their power and their influence.
That's right. So when we now know what not to do, what should be done instead?
Maybe just to answer, I see we have a question about like patent issuance and like it potentially being non-material. And I think material can have like very distinct meanings to investors, but I think and maybe this is a good segue to educating shareholders, right? But I think the point there is that and I'm risking stealing your thunder here, Sylvan, so I'll hand it over. But just to say, I think that where it becomes material, right, is when it tells you about something you can do that you couldn't do before, or it tells you about a market that you didn't have, or an innovation or a product that you didn't have before, and that's where it gets really exciting.
Yeah. No,
There,
fair.
I'll let you go.
No, it's good. It's good. And let me also, there's another question in the chat on if we will attach dollar values in patent side in the future. I love that question. I take this with me. It will be very hard, right? Like it will be very hard because we kind of need to match then also patents to the product landscape and match them products to the commercialization of those. But it's definitely, yeah, kind of the golden nuggets, and maybe with the power of AI, why could be another good anchor to have that. Um, on the education stakeholders part, it's tip number one. And I mean, many investors still think of IP as something technical or legal, and when it's in reality protecting your core business assets, right? And if we don't explain what IP means and means in terms of protecting business and mitigating risk, then others will fill in the gaps. And usually they will underestimate this value. So education for me doesn't mean giving a patent lecture or doing a talk of what IP how the IP system work. It means translating the whole complexity into something easy digestible that stakeholders understand, although not being any close to an IP legal team. And so you need to speak about growth, on how it protects the revenue, and how it drives your competitive advantage. How you might even block out some competitors from that market, and how you secure also for the next 5 or 10 years those revenues. So you don't need to see the patent numbers first. They need to understand the story that these numbers tell. And so when you frame your IP narrative in business terms, it changes the perception. And instead of saying, "Oh, we filed X amount of patents," why don't you say our innovations protects technologies behind 60% of the next year's expected revenue? And that's the level investors start paying attention to, because that can then be translated into dollar values. And I feel this is also about timing. So the best place to start is through existing investor touch points. And these are the annual reports, the capital market days, the ESG updates. And every one of those is a chance to explain how innovation creates measurable value. So educating stakeholders is really about building the trust and bringing light into a black box and start seeing it as a reliable indicator for your future performance. So let's maybe take a deeper look on what good looks like. And we brought just a couple of examples here with us. There are many more out there. And I kind of just selected those which came to my hand first. So there are many, many more. And I'm happy also if you can send me over some other examples, right? Like I would love to collect them all. Here we have a first one that's taken from the ASM annual report as an example. And in their integrated report, they have a dedicated and entire section on IP. So they don't just say how many patents they have, they explain what those patents protect, how their portfolio evolved over time, and why that growth matters for their technology leadership. And it also gives you a bit of and like it shapes the narratives on where they stand. And so does Denso. So Denso takes a slightly different approach. They They integrate the intellectual capital into their reporting framework alongside the R&D and people part. It's all part of their single story about innovation capability and how investment in research and talent and IP just come together. But in the end, they explain how strong they feel about with this IP and that this is a true part to the company's DNA. Asai Kasei takes it even a one step further. Their president is personal reference in the IP strategy in the opening message of the report. So that single gesture shows you and shows investors that IP isn't some legal thing somewhere, but it's really buried deep in the technical appendix. And what all these examples have in common is that they make IP tangible and understandable, and that IP is strategically relevant. And they show how educating stakeholders isn't just about lecturing them or showing them the volume, is about providing clarity and consistency and how that is all fitting to the business strategy.
Maybe so. Totally agree with everything you're saying there, Sylvan. And maybe if I might add just a couple thoughts. So one, we talked a moment ago about IP and like linking IP to strategy being good for like IP managers and also good for the company. And I think the point you're making here, which is really like also important, is that it's also good for investors, right? You're not burdening investors, you're not being a pain, you're helping them as they do their job, thinking about, as we saw a moment ago, like something like 80% of the company, right? And I think like Charles Clark had a great question in the chat, which I think bears mentioning here too, that like, in the past, I think that there's been like, maybe some skepticism or like general misunderstanding by both investors and maybe more specifically stock analysts on the role of IP. And I do think that that's changing as intangible assets become more and more important. But I also think too that part of that comes from kind of like treating IP as like a little bit of like an island or a silo and not linking it to the strategy. And I think you talked a lot about the reports that you can lead this in. I also think about earnings calls, right? And the ability to like explain to investors on those, like, we're moving in this direction, we have this IP, and here's how we're measuring it, and here's the value of it, as you kind of see the examples doing here. And exactly how you tell that story is going to vary with your strategy. And so, for some, like this is like IP is really kind of showing, I think as someone else mentioned in the chat, it's a byproduct of your innovation. And so we're innovative, and here's the IP that flowed from that. And for some, licensing and like, some of the more like protection rights are going to be more important. And so they're, you're going to talk about IP and measure it differently because your strategy is different and it's playing a different role for you there. And I think, but I think all of that stems from one, understanding the strategy, but two, linking that and telling the story for investors about like where this fits into the larger narrative of where the company is going and what you're trying to do here.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And I love questions being popped up in the chat right away. Also with having time is flying, right? We have another 20 minutes to go. We have 4 more great tips for you guys. So whenever questions you have, post them in the chat. I don't think we will have much of an open Q&A session at the end, to be honest. Tip number 2, avoid reporting numbers without the story. I feel like we said this already a bit on the slides before, but quantity alone doesn't connect to your value, right? What matters is the why behind the numbers. And although it sounds simple, it's quite difficult sometimes for IP professionals to take this different view. Because in the day-to-day work, this why behind the numbers isn't often, the main like is not a usual perspective one takes, right? It's always about details. It's always about counting things, but actually asking the why behind the numbers. That's something that adds the value and how those patents protect the future revenue. And even that is sometimes, of course, not the easy part, but it is the core part to tell a story that helps to understand the numbers. So instead of just listening figures, use them all to tell a story and then explain the trends, link metrics to a strategy, and highlight examples of how your innovation translates into a market leadership or in a risk reduction. The story creates credibility, and that helps investors to understand your company isn't just collecting patents, it's deliberately building a moat around the technologies that matter for the future. And what good looks could look like here is maybe a report that just came out by Hitachi Energy. It's a sustainability report from 2025. And what it does really beautifully is in their sustainability report, they link IP metrics directly to purpose. So not just listening how many patents they have, but highlighting specifically how they align with the company's broader mission and on how they will advance a sustainable energy future. And Interdigital takes another smart approach. At their investor day, they don't overwhelm the audience with the data, but instead they walk through their innovation cycle. So how ideas have moved from their R&D to patents, and then how this moved to commercial partnerships and revenue. So showing kind of the full cycle is a great story that Interdigital can tell here. And in both cases, these companies are doing, yeah, something simple but powerful. They connect IP to strategy and performance. And that makes the data very meaningful. And so investors don't just want to know how much innovation is happening. They want to understand why it matters and where it creates value and how it supports resilience. Michael, do you also have an observation here?
So I totally agree with you. It makes me think of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy for
Yeah.
those that have read it. For the answer to the universe is 42, right? And the question is like, what does 42 mean, or what do we do with that, right? And if I think saying we have 42 patents is a little bit of the same, right? What is that the answer to? And I think building that up to explain why we're mentioning IP at this point in the story, and then how we're measuring it, and like why that's critical. Absolutely important. And I love the example here around around like telling kind of like an innovation story there. And I see the comments. It's like a public about kind of like Japanese companies. I do think there's going to be like geographic and industry variation here for sure, but I think we've selected examples here that are sort of like extremes to illustrate the point. But I think the point remains that it's like that presenting just numbers without context is very, very hard. Not just for IP. That's true for anything too. It's the same as true if I present to you the amount of cash on the books, right? Like, is that good or is that bad? It's very hard to say. It depends on your strategy and how it fits. And I think that the same thing with the patents and the quality of the patents as well.
Yeah, no, yeah, I totally agree here. And tip number 3 is align IP narratives and the business model. And even when companies report on their intellectual property, too many treat it as an isolated topic, right? And it goes again a bit on that narrative we showed earlier to connect IP to the business model. And although some might say, oh, InterDigital has a business model that is so far from what our business model is, it kind of shows how a business model looks like where commercialization of IP is very keen. And the best companies link their innovation story directly to this business model and can explain how patents enable new products or reduce dependency on suppliers or how create licensing opportunities. And they show how their technology roadmap connects to their market roadmap. And that's what turns IP into a language the investors do understand. So the examples of what good looks like here are again one from Asahi Kasei. They go beyond the simple mentioning of IP. They have issued a dedicated intellectual property report alongside their integrated report. And this separation gives the topic some real weight inside, they don't just list assets, they explain how their patent intelligence departments operates, and what goals there are and how it contributes to innovation strategy. And that level of transparency signals that IP isn't just a part of R&D, it's a part of corporate governance. And MEI does something similar in the integrated report. They take readers into their IP strategy, showing how it supports new product creation and a long-term innovation capability. It's detailed, it's educational, it shows the link between IP and business continuity. And yeah, that's also something investors always value.
And just going to echo what you say here, that I think that the value of IP sits in the context of the strategy, and I think in the business model. And it'll, as I think some of the questions have commented on, it's going to play a different role depending on what that business model is. And I view it as sort of our job, or my job working with clients, to think about how that fits and kind of telling the story there.
Yeah. There is, I'm just watching on the questions in the chat. So they, Anora is a pretty good and be abroad. That's nice. Thank you for this. And as a patent site user, I find the valuation based on the brief and geographies covered in citation analysis very helpful, as this is essential statistical analysis and can be done by a lawyer or economics or other users. I'm curious to hear to what extent, if any, you engage with expert knowledge beyond citations to identify patents reading on truly valuable breakthrough technologies. All right, that's a very good question, Patrick. So it's the patent, our patent site metrics, the patent asset index, the technology relevance, the market coverage, they sit in the place where we're very happy where they sit in. Could they be improved? If we will improve them, they will also not be working any longer for longitude comparisons, right? Like we like that we have one system in place for now 15 years, so you can always go back in time and see what was the TR value back then, and if we would change anything of the metrics, this would break. However, I mean, we kind of have day-to-day discussions with customers on if our metrics and just looking on the citation side really resonates with what they would think from an expert knowledge. And most often it really does. And with looking on the citations and looking on the market coverage, we can identify those breakout technologies.
Maybe I'll just add here. I see, like, I think that we have two good answers there from Patrick and then Professor Christopoulos. And I feel like I think in some regards that they're closely related, right? And that patent site does make it very easy to quickly quantify portfolios, and I sort of love that too. I also like to think I bring something specialized to the table, right, beyond like downloading a patent site report. And I think often what that is a view of the competitive landscape. So it's not just saying, company A has 10 patents. It's being able to say, well, they have, this is their portfolio. These are the relevant other companies. These are how those portfolios compare, not just based on citations, but also thinking about kind of unique technologies and where, how those lie. And specifically, especially if you have an industry that's sort of moving in a direction, thinking about where those citations come from. And then, of course, there are more advanced things you can do to think about, like, the dispersion of the citations and like, does it build on like one stream of work or different works and things like that. And but often I think those are pretty deep cases and pretty deep analyses. And I think of like from an investor perspective, often what I think about is like, who are the relevant peers and how do we compare not just portfolio size against portfolio size, but portfolios on a given topic or technology or product, and how do we think about like that. And I think that tends to be like both qualitative and quantitative, but also require a lot more expertise than I find, at least like, a lawyer or sort of an economist can pull out quickly.
Yeah.
Depending on their expertise.
Tip number four. I know it says three there, but it's tip number four. Align IP narrative around strategic themes that your investors' relation wants to highlight. And themes could be a variety, right? Like we could think of the commitment to AI leadership, or the 2030 climate targets. And so let's take AI, for example. Almost every annual report now claims some form of AI leadership, but few can prove it, right? And using patent side or any other patent tool, you can map exactly how many AI related patents your company holds and benchmark their quality and show how they underpin products or data capabilities. And I really can like recall a customer just telling me once he got a call from his CEO, actually entering the plane, flying to a conference, and said like, "Hey, by the way, it was already like a year ago, right? Like where the AI hype was like still super early, and it was like, hey, how many patents do we have on AI technologies, right? And just by looking on the IP side and looking how many patents are connected to AI, this person was able to just report in a couple of hours on how well the company is positioned on AI. Or let's look on the sustainability and climate goals, right? Investors increasingly link access to capital with demonstrable contributions to energy and transitions, right? That's very interesting. Sustainability isn't something for like a political opinion or so, right? Like financial institutions wants to see sustain like that their money is also safe in a couple of years, right? And they want to invest in sustainable thinking companies. And so mapping patents to, I don't know, green hydrogen or battery storage or any energy efficiency technologies by using the CPC-Y codes or our own patent sites SDG mapping can really help here to show your innovation footprint in that door. And some examples we also brought on that and are either here again on ASM, right? They would use the patent asset index for showing the value of their ALD patent portfolio and how this, the value sits in these technologies. But also at Siemens or Hitachi Energy using the SDG metrics to map their portfolio on the sustainability goals.
I'm conscious we're getting close to the end. So I'll just say quickly on this one that I think this relates closely to some of the questions in the Q&A around, what's the expertise? And to me, a lot of the expertise there is knowing what metric is relevant and how to subset the patent so that you are talking about kind of like when you're thinking about a specific technology or a specific subset of your patents, how do you compare that? And how do you think about competitors' portfolios within that?
Yeah. Last tip for
Do
today.
a whole talk on that, though. That's a good topic.
Yeah, it is. It truly is. It truly is. Managing IP risk while being transparent. Astellas Pharma takes a bold approach in their integrated report. So instead of glossing over patent expiration, they talk about them openly, right? In an interview with the CEO, right? They are strong signals to investor where it says we know where we stand, we understand our portfolio life cycle, and we are managing it proactively. And so most companies treat expirations like a weakness to hide, but Astellas turns it into evidence of maturity. They demonstrate where is the portfolio management. It's just like about acquisition, it's about renewal, it's about timing and what comes next. Also, Meiji offers another excellent example in their report. They acknowledge that they are not global leaders yet in every field, but they emphasize measurable improvements, right? They want to show they show that the progress of their patent quality indicators and explain the actions they are taking to strengthen these technology areas. And so by doing so, they transform potential vulnerability into a narrative of growth and accountability. So count us on that, right? Like we are transparent about that, and that's where we want to get measured on. So what to do next, right? I mean, you all get the slides, you all get the recordings. So one good advice, of course, would be to share those, right? And start an internal discussion about, hey guys, I just watched this webinar. Here are the slides. I like them. What do you think about them, right? Like set a meeting with corporate communication. Maybe prepare that and show what you can bring to the table. Share the best practices with them. You can discuss the positioning of the value of IP and its link to your KPIs and risk and business model. And that's more responsibilities you as IP executives can take and plan the narrative and visualization around that. Ask to include a SciIPO message. And to follow this all up, I want you all to invite to our research on the IP maturity model, because we see that IP maturity is really well also connects to what we've showing here, right? On how mature an organization is to speak openly about their IP, internally, but also externally. And we're just about to set this all up. But I want to invite you. It's a shared research study between Resonac, a chemical company from Japan, very at the forefront of IP intelligence, and with the head of IP intelligence, Masusima-san. He's managing a team of nearly 20 people in his IP intelligence team. He and myself are working on a research study. We want to see where are global innovation leaders at the moment, but more interestingly, where would they like to be in the future? Where would they like to be in 3 years' time? And we have set up a model that is looking from a more strategic perspective on maturity. So it looks on the awareness and culture, on the governance and reporting, on cross-functional integration, on the IP strategy and the leadership support, but also on resource and capabilities. And we have done some pre-validation and piloting of the models, the questions, and we are going out to measure these. We measure these in two ways, either by an open one-to-one meeting with open back and forth, but also in terms of an online questionnaire. And we're just about to launch the website and happy to get as many of you join this research study to not only show internally where you stay, but also show where you would like to stay in a couple of years' time. And we would love both Michael and myself to help you on that journey. So with this being said, Michael and myself, we're very happy for you all that you spent this hour with us. If we missed any of your questions today, we'll follow up with them alongside with the recording, alongside with the PowerPoint slides. And once this webinar commences, you will be prompted to fill out a brief survey. This really helps Michael, but also myself, to make time in our calendars and get you all on board, and hope you have liked those type of sessions. And thank you for your attendance, and everyone have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much. And please stay in touch. We appreciate it.